Um, Good morning. Thanks for having me. Good morning, Congressman. Here are the rules. Right here we have Howard Berman and Brad Sherman. I think you all know them. Both Democrats. They are the only two candidates on the ballot in this November. This is a runoff under the state's new open primary system. We'll give each candidate 3 minutes for an opening statement. I will ask questions and ask that the candidates limit their responses to 2 minutes each on the questions. And then each candidate will have a 3-minute closing statement. Got it? Doug will hold up a 15 seconds remaining sign when it's time to stop. And then Helene, over there. And once the 15 seconds are up, and it's up, there will be a cowbell, and you don't want that to happen. So I'm going to go in alphabetical order. For opening statements, Congressman Berman. It doesn't matter, whatever you want. If you're more comfortable here, that's fine.
Well, thank you very much, and I thank VICA for doing this. For my entire time in Congress and even before, I've worked with VICA closely on many different projects, and appreciate you giving us an opportunity to share our thoughts and answer questions. In this race and before you, you have two very different people who hold different beliefs, not so much on all the issues coming before us, but on our attitudes and our approach to public service. We're living in some very difficult times. We have a massive debt overhang, we have a lagging economic recovery, we have a crisis in residential housing caused by the collapse of real estate values. We live in an era of tight budgets, of government cuts, of having to do more with less. I think more than ever, this community, the people, the businesses, the industries that call the Valley home deserve, but even more importantly, absolutely require the most effective person to lead back in the Congress. As Valley residents, we need a workhorse, not a show horse, a congressman who can work with others in his own party and with the other party for the sake of moving an agenda that's good for America and good for the Valley forward. We don't need a congressman who really can't do either very well. Only one person on this stage has meaningfully cut fraud and abuse and waste in government spending through legislation which has produced over $32 billion in recoveries for the taxpayers from fraudulent contractors and deterred billions of dollars in additional fraud by virtue of strong provisions and whistleblower protections. Only one person on this stage has meaningfully fought to loosen U.S. industry hurting, harmful export controls and champion jobs for our homegrown aerospace industry. Only one person on this stage has tirelessly fought with many of you in this room and in the Valley on behalf of our creative community to protect intellectual property rights all the time, not some of the time. I'm sorry, I didn't see that sign, so that was a...
Yellow is 15.
Yellow, 15 seconds. When John McCain and Barbara Boxer, Joe Lieberman, Lindsey Graham, and Dianne Feinstein say, we believe, we work with these people every day, they don't agree on anything else. When they say Howard Berman is the candidate to support us, he's the most effective representative on the great issues we need to face. That is that's an endorsement. I now feel like I'm in the Sacramento basketball arena. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Brad Sherman from America's best named city, Sherman Oaks. For 16 years, I served the San Fernando Valley. For 16 years, I've been part of the business community of the San Fernando Valley. And that's why I'm proud to have the endorsement of hundreds of Chamber of Commerce leaders from one end of the valley to the other. And that's why I'm proud to have the endorsement of the immediate past president, the current chairman, and the incoming chairman of the largest and most important business organization in the San Fernando Valley. I worked with you to make sure that the Canoga Park Post Office continues to accept bulk mail and kept businesses in Canoga Park dedicated to that. We worked together to make sure that that airport runway is going to be closed only 10 business days, not 17 weeks. I have stood up to $4 million of attack ads on television and the mail. And still on June 5th, by a margin of 10%, prevailed in that election. And on September 20th, by 13 points in the poll conducted for KABC television. And I'm particularly proud of that poll because it shows I'm leading with the old and the young, Anglo, Latino, and Asian, Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, Catholics, Protestants, Jews, those of other faiths, and even those who don't have faith, still have faith in what I'm doing in Washington, D.C. I'm not a show horse, I'm a workhorse. And that's why I don't put my name on everything like some sort of tagger. And that's why I don't just try to pass good bills. We've been able to stop some bad ones as well. Let me just talk about real estate because it affects everything else. When there were proposed FASB regulations that would have added $1.3 trillion of liabilities to the balance sheet of American business and would have made long-term leasing impossible, I stood up, worked with the CPA caucus that I organized, and we stopped those FASB regulations, and we stopped a major hit on commercial real estate. When the QRM regulations were proposed, regulations that would have said that you need a 20% down payment, no matter how good your credit is, no matter how high your income is, in order to get a home mortgage. I organized 285 members of Congress, roughly half Democrat, half Republican. Howard joined as one of those 285, and we stopped regulations, which would have started a precipitous decline in home values here in the San Fernando Valley. And remember, if people see their home values go down, they're not going out to a restaurant unless that restaurant has golden arches in front of it. They're not spending money in the Valley economy. I've served this Valley for 16 years, but I think the best is yet to come. Thank you.
Okay, now the questions, and you guys, I've been told because of the camera, need to sit down over here when you answer your questions. Okay. What have you done to create jobs, and what will you do if re-elected to help Valley businesses and grow our economy? Start with Congressman Berman.
Well, thank you. I'm very proud in two particular areas. I have led the fight. Perhaps our largest industry in terms of direct employment and indirect employment. I am the congressional Democratic leader on efforts to protect intellectual property, stop digital theft, keep incentives alive for holding film and television production in this region against some massive competition and subsidies from other states and other parts of the world. On export reform, I am a congressional leader. I have two pieces of legislation now to reduce export controls on aerospace, information technology, and other growth sectors. Our export controls are remnants of the Cold War that need to be made more efficient, less intrusive, get rid of some of the items that are now considered to be requiring specific validated licenses for exports. For every $1 billion in exports, we create 6,000 jobs. 95% of the world's customers are outside of the United States. One fundamental part of America's economic recovery is restoring export growth. No state benefits more from export growth than California. No region of the country is more reliant on intensified and increased exports than Southern California and the San Fernando Valley, in aerospace, in film, music, and in all the other products that the Valley makes.
Congressman Sherman?
I think we've been effective in focusing on real estate, which is the largest industry here in the San Fernando Valley. I led the effort to have a permanent 625 loan limit for those buying a home and having that home mortgage financed by Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. If that wasn't there, then even today and certainly a year ago, there wouldn't be any way to finance a new home in the San Fernando Valley. And we led the fight to set a $729,000 limit on FHA coverage. I led the effort to push the State Department to approve licenses for export more quickly. And when it comes to our exports, I have been for a much tougher policy because in trade negotiation, because the only way we're really going to have access to foreign markets is if we make sure that we have a fair trading system, not the $750 billion trade deficit we have today. Many of us have worked on trying to prevent piracy and other things that undercut our movie industry. That industry is doing well because of its creativity, unfortunately not because of anything Congress has been able to do. We need to move forward in this economy. I support the President's jobs bill because it is simply absurd not for the government not to use today's low interest rate and low inflation rate environment to start new road building and construction projects. I've supported the infrastructure bank and co-sponsored it. It's in some ways modeled after our own mayor's 3010 program. We need to move the economy forward. I've also been a supporter of the Fed's recent actions. Thank you.
Thank you. If re-elected, what will you do to make the federal government more efficient and reduce taxpayer burdens? Starting with Congressman Sherman.
There are so many things. We organized a CPA caucus, and this is only going to make sense to a few accountants here, but we're pushing to make sure that you get your K-1s before the your tax return reflecting those K-1s is due. We have to look at every aspect of the federal government and try to minimize its adverse impact on business. We need to use government to keep our interest rates low during this terrible and continuing recession. In order to do that, the Fed needs to expand or continue the program that it has announced to buy long-term bonds, whether they be government-guaranteed mortgages or long-term government bonds. I think I'll yield to our next speaker.
Congressman Berman.
Yeah, a couple of very specific examples. My legislation to modernize and make more efficient export promotion reforms. We now have 17 different agencies of the federal government claiming to have some responsibility for export promotion. The fact is, a mid-sized and small business in the San Fernando Valley is not getting the help they need to find export markets around the world for their products. When federal government's authority is diffused among so many agencies, you don't have a coordinated message, you don't have an effective strategy. When I go back to Congress, I'm recognized as the leader in the effort to reform our whole foreign assistance program. Huge amounts of money are spent on foreign aid that aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. The means for accountability for our foreign aid programs are not effective and not working. We are spending large amounts of money with inside the Beltway contractors without having the capability inside the U.S. Agency for International Development to evaluate and monitor what they are doing to know that our foreign assistance programs are achieving the goals they're supposed to be achieving. And the most important thing is having our consulates, and these are in the areas where I work on my committee and where I make a difference, having our consulates fighting for American businessmen in the commercial markets in those countries. We need intellectual property personnel in each consulate, promoting American film production, American music, making sure that countries are enforcing their laws on digital privacy, and these are the efficiencies that would come from doing that. Would mean more profits, more jobs in this country.
Thank you. Let's continue on concerning trade. The business community has long supported the passage of free trade agreements, including the recently enacted agreements with Colombia, Panama, and South Korea. Do you support these agreements? Why or why not? Congressman Berman.
I support free trade agreements because they're really rules about fair competition. Here's a huge difference between the two of us. He will deny it, he will scream and yell. He is a pure out and out protectionist. That is a constrained and inaccurate view of what will help America. Every one of these trade agreements knocks down higher barriers in the other countries than they do reduce barriers to this country. You have to have effective enforcement. You have to be aggressive in challenging violations of those trade agreements. But you talk about protecting intellectual property, and it is through the trade agreements that we get the toughest forms of intellectual property protection in these other countries to try and deal with piracy. We got to do a lot more. But the notion that America can live just selling to itself is foolish. It's 19th century. It's crazy. And we have a huge manufacturing deindustrialization problem in this country. None of it came from the passage of the trade agreements. We lost General Motors and every automobile manufacturer in Southern California. When I came in to office, there were 5 automobile manufacturing plants, 4 tire manufacturing plants. They had to do with things having nothing to do with the trade agreements, and that's why the entertainment industry, VICA, and anybody who's concerned with jobs in America understands without these trade agreements we can't get the exports we need. The 2 most important parts of economic recovery, in addition to sensible government stimulus, are 1, consumer confidence, and 2, finding new export markets for American products and services. And I stand with you in believing that trade is one of the key strategies for getting out of the economic doldrums.
Congressman Sherman, are you a protectionist?
Trade is critical, and it's critical that we change our trade policy. $750 billion trade deficit. If we just had balanced trade with China, we'd have an unemployment rate of under 5%. If we had balanced trade with the world, VICA would be conducting sessions on how to hire employees when they're so scarce and you can't find them. Nothing is as insane as to keep doing the same thing that produces bad results and thinking the results are going to change. That is why I oppose our trade relationship with China. Because you can't just knock down rules if you're dealing with a non-rules based country. We have nothing that affects private enterprise and consumer decisions other than our published laws. And once we open all those to Chinese exports, those exports roll in. Do you really think that the people of China are free to buy our goods just because there's nothing written that says they can't? That is a society in which the government has seats on the boards of the major importers and the major industries. That is a society where any business person that operates off message can find themselves in a re-education camp. That is not a society in which just changing the written rules, written to polish their image in the United States, is going to work. Now, I can see how we'd make this mistake 15 years ago, but now we have 15 years of experience. That's why I oppose NAFTA, CAFTA, and MFN for China. If we're going to open up markets, we have to say we look at results, and we have to have balanced trade.
Okay, I'm going to let a little back and forth here. Congressman Berman requests a rebuttal, and Congressman Sherman, you'll be allowed to go back, but just once.
This is typical Brad. He's a smart guy. He knows we don't have a free trade agreement with China, that there's never been a vote on a free trade agreement with China. We all know that China isn't even complying with their own obligations under the WTO. We both opposed granting that status to China. But the fact is, NAFTA, it could have been better, and subsequent agreements have been better. NAFTA helps California. It has massively increased our exports. The answer to the problem of the $750 billion deficit in trade is not to cut off trade, it's to increase exports. It's to get more of these agreements, to knock out more of these barriers to American products. This vision of how America is going to grow is so constrained, is so negative, and is so counterproductive that I just don't think sensible people should be taking this view. Trade is part of our strategy for enhancing and strengthening our economy and creating more jobs.
Okay, you got like 1 minute.
I don't know why we need the typical Brad disparaging personal remarks when we have a policy difference. And I don't know why you need to interrupt me while I'm speaking when I did not interrupt you. We don't have a free trade agreement with China. We have an MFN for China. It's time to end it until and unless the Chinese agree to really balanced and fair trade. Yes, we can do something about it, but my colleague will not co-sponsor my bill and will not support my bill to say to the Chinese, you have to open your markets, we have to have balanced trade, or we will go back to not having MFN for China. As for the idea that these bills, these agreements reduce our trade deficit, just look at the most recent South Korea deal. Our trade deficit started going up just as soon as the agreement became effective. And that agreement has in it rules of origin, so that goods that are 65% made in China, 35% finished in South Korea by Chinese workers living in barracks, can come into our country duty-free while we get no access to the Chinese market. That's the kind of negotiation which causes the greatest entrepreneurial country in the world, the country with the greatest workers in the world, to suffer loss after loss, $750 billion of losses this year and last year and next year. We're not losing because we have bad business people. We're not losing because we have bad workers. We're losing because we have bad policies.
Okay, on to the next question. Do you think that the Affordable Care Act should be implemented as is, or are there areas where you would suggest improvement? Congressman Berman.
Number one, I think it's very important to implement the Affordable Care Act. We've already seen the benefits of it in the context of families able to keep children on their insurance policies, the end of denying coverage to people with pre-existing illnesses, and when the insurance exchanges are set up, and if it's done right, this will offer an opportunity for large numbers of people who cannot now afford individual health insurance policies, to have access to that, as well as provide beneficial terms for small businesses and businesses that aren't covering their employees to seriously consider the option of covering their employees. Should there be changes, I am always open. Part of what I believe my obligation is to see if there's something in here that needs to be fixed, and you come and you explain it to me, and show me why, and I conclude that you're right, I will fight to change it. I will not be stuck in the notion of, we passed it this way, it cannot change. But the fundamental notion is that with the individual mandate, that is the only way to do these other reforms. And not only is it the right thing to do from a fundamental moral and human position, that America should not be the only industrialized country in the world that has tens of millions of people without health insurance, but from a notion of capturing control of healthcare costs in the future, getting rid of the person who ends up going to the emergency room and then everyone else has to pay for the medical service to that individual cost. They can never cover the bill for that service. Promoting prevention instead of last minute, massively expensive treatments. This is going to be good for everyone, good for stopping the huge inflation in health insurance costs. It's a very positive thing. Open to change, yes, but the fundamental part of this needs to be implemented in full.
Congressman Sherman.
I agree with everything Howard just said. Let me add a few things. First, I support a public option because I think that will provide a low-cost, competitive alternative for those who do not have insurance now. Second, let me explain why I think this bill is important. The choice is not between the system of 2006 and the new bill, because the system we had in 2006 and 2008 was unraveling and unsustainable. Here's what was happening. We had 35 million people uninsured. They don't get the clinic medicine they need. They wait till they get sicker. They go to an emergency room. They get a $20,000 bill from the emergency room. These are people who can't even afford health insurance. They're not paying the $20,000 bill. Hospital can't get paid for the $20,000 worth of services. What do? They jack up the price on those with insurance. That means insurance has to jack up its price. That means you as employers have to pay more. Some of you are going to be in a circumstance where you either have to turn off insurance for your employees or ask them to chip in more, and some of them won't. So now you have 40 million people uninsured. That's another 5 million people going into the emergency room. That's more $20,000 bills not being paid. That's the price of health care being charged to those with insurance going up. That's the insurance bill going up. That's more people uninsured. Now you got 45 million people uninsured. That was the spiral that we were on. We didn't have a choice. We can't turn to the hospitals of this country and say, we're going to have 35, 40, 45 million people uninsured, and you will provide them with tens of thousands of dollars of coverage and not get paid. That wasn't going to work longer term. And now we've got a system that I think can work if we implement it well.
Okay, next question. The entertainment industry is a major sector of the San Fernando Valley economy. One of its top priorities last year was the Stop Online Piracy Act, which would have expanded enforcement mechanisms to fight online trafficking of copyrighted intellectual property and counterfeit goods. Unfortunately, SOPA was removed from consideration late last year. Did you support it, and would you support reintroduction during the next session? Congressman Sherman.
I support the objectives of SOPA, and I'm ready to join with the entertainment industry in supporting their plan. When it actually got written, and my colleague takes credit for writing it, it was the worst script since Ishtar. It was the worst rollout since the Edsel. I went to speak at North Hollywood High School in the shadow of the studios, as I speak just about every high school in the San Fernando Valley, and I was greeted with "No on SOPA" t-shirts. Why? Because of how the bill was drafted and how it was presented. And whether you love SOPA or you hate it, there's one thing that's certain: it isn't going to pass. If it can't get support in North Hollywood, it's not going to get support in Columbus, Ohio. The bill was written in a way that played into its opponent's arguments. So we need a new approach, and one that makes it clear that our focus is on outside the country websites dealing with pirated movies and entertainment. What we can't do is just reintroduce SOPA next year the way we did last year. It was a phenomenal failure. And in general, our efforts to stop piracy have been a failure. We've lost so much of the foreign market. We allow China to tell us how many screens we're going to have for their movies. How about a limit as to how many stores can sell Chinese-made shoes to match the number of screens we're allowed to have in China? How about the fact that on the way to or from lunch at any meeting to discuss intellectual property in China, you stumble across pirated movies being sold? We need to be much tougher in our negotiations with China, and we need to be much smarter with our efforts to deal with online piracy.
Congressman Berman.
Well, I started out in the opening statement saying why we're two different people. I don't make a substantive decision on legislation on the fact that somebody wears a sweatshirt that disagrees with my opinion. I could develop the case for why that's my opponent's standard operating method. The fact is, SOPA was about foreign rogue websites. The question is whether even should American companies facilitate and link and charge advertising for, and credit card companies that allow payment to those foreign rogue websites that are stealing our intellectual property, our movies, our films, our music, whether they should be immunized because they happen to be based in the United States. Darrell Issa, a fellow I don't agree with on a lot of issues, when he endorsed me without my asking, said Howard Berman is the kind of legislator that he and I could go into a closed room. I don't know if I like that idea so much, but he and I could go into a closed room and we could work out the differences on SOPA to provide something effective to deal with the scourge of digital theft. And it's China, it's Russia, it's the Caribbean islands, it's hundreds of other places where people want to profit by stealing. That is what digital theft is. The opponent's arguments were bogus. This was not about free speech. Free speech is not the right to steal other people's property. This was not about breaking the internet. There was nothing in this bill that was going to destroy the internet. This technology is incredibly important for getting people the films, the music, the software, the video games they want the way they want it. I want to empower the technology companies to do this, but not at the price of stealing other people's property.
Okay, how about?
I wonder if I can have a personal...
Yeah, like 30 seconds.
I don't reach my public policy views by looking at sweatshirts, but I do listen to the American people to see what might pass and what won't. And SOPA was the most spectacular marketing failure since Ishtar. You can't go into a closed room with Darrell Issa, write a bill, and figure it's going to pass. You have to talk to the American people. You have to craft a bill that's at least going to be popular in Hollywood and North Hollywood and hopefully across the country. And you can't ignore Google and the other opponents and then say, oh, it's a great bill. Only people in sweatshirts disagree with it. You have to design a bill that will sell to the American people. And talking about why SOPA is wonderful begs the question, why is it dead?
Okay, Congressman Berman, you got 30 seconds.
We have to learn how to talk to the American people to pass our legislation, he tells you. We have to market it better. This is a man who in 15 years in Congress has passed 3 pieces of legislation. One, a private immigration bill, and the other 2 naming post offices. Brad is wonderful at talking. He's very good. He's very articulate. translating it into anything that is actually helping people in terms of government actions, he's weak on. I'm much better. We will change SOPA, but we will come back to it. Part of why I want to go back to Congress. I've been there 29 years, but I want to do more, is to make those changes.
Okay, that's it. No. Just once. I gotta have those rules. All right, next question. Let's move on. Due to the failure of the Congressional Joint Select Committee on Deficit Reduction to reach an agreement, automatic across-the-board trigger cuts are set to begin next year in a process called sequestration. What are your feelings on sequestration now that it is about to become a reality? Congressman Berman.
We cannot let sequestration become a reality. Sequestration would be devastating to our national security. It would be disastrous for our discretionary spending. Health research would be killed. Education assistance would be killed. We cannot let sequestration go into effect. It was passed to try and create a dynamic which would produce a across the aisle, bicameral, bipartisan, executive, congressional deal in the wake of the crisis over the debt limit last summer, a year ago. That didn't work then. It's going to have to work now. I'm an optimist about this country, and in this particular case, I'm an optimist that when the crisis becomes so big, as it has become, when the fiscal cliff is so steep, when the instability around the world requires American strength and leadership, we will get out of our ideological fixes. We will fight for things we care about, but we will be willing to compromise and make the kind of deal that gets us out of this hole. And part of that will be suspending the sequestration before it goes into effect. We cannot let that go into effect. That will symbolize the true decline of America as a world leader.
Congressman Sherman.
Generally agree with my colleague. I think we need to put together a glide path toward a balanced budget. We won't get there right away, and we can't do it by automatic sequestration and formulas. We have to do it by looking at everything we spend money on, as well as our tax system. I was part of the budget committee in 1997 that put together the most recent balanced and surplus budget. Going back to a few other things, my colleague, in a 17-year stretch, passed only one bill with his name on it. I don't criticize him for that, even though that bill was a typographical and technical corrections bill. Why? Because putting your name on stuff isn't the way you're an effective member of Congress. I never want to have my name on it. That's why when I introduced the bill in 2003 to permanently increase the conforming loan limit, and it was apparent that the best way to do that was to put it in a larger piece of legislation without my name on it, that's exactly what I did. That's why when I wrote the U.S.-Israel Energy Cooperation Act, and it was clear that the best way to get it passed was part of a major energy bill, that's what I did. I'm not there to be a tagger. Maybe at 3 in the morning on a boulevard in the valley, perhaps, but not in Congress. I'm not there to be a show horse. I'm not there to say how many bills do I have my name on. I have co-sponsored over 200 bills that are now law.
Okay, do we have time for what, one more question or two more questions, then ending? Two more? Okay. The Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act drastically expands federal regulations on the nation's financial services industry. Do you think the Dodd-Frank Act should be implemented as is, or do changes need to be made in it? Congressman Sherman.
Dodd-Frank, first of all, started as a bill with some terrible provisions in it. And I worked for a year and a half to get those provisions taken out and was successful. Dodd-Frank had what I called and what the current chair of the Financial Services Committee, who at that time was in the minority, called permanent bailout authority, unlimited permanent bailout authority. We took that out of the bill. That bill had a special tax on financial institutions of as small as $10 billion. I know that sounds big, but that's really just a medium-sized credit union, medium-sized community bank, to pay for the cost of bailing out Wall Street giants, while those smaller firms would never be eligible for a bailout because they were not, quote, systemically critical. We took that out, and only then did I co-sponsor the bill. I think that bill is important, but the bill empowers regulators. It is not overly specific. There is time and time again when the regulators have gone a little bit off track, and we've corrected them. When it comes to defining qualifying mortgages, I am for a safe harbor so that lenders don't get sued and so that interest rates don't go up in anticipation of those suits. I'm not for the regulation, and I led, and I want to thank Howard for being one of the 285 members who joined under my leadership in stopping the bad regulations that would have imposed, that would have required a 20% down payment from every home buyer. So we need to look at how this law is implemented. It leaves perhaps too much discretion to the regulators. As they write the regulations, we need to take them up and perhaps even before they're written, pass legislation in the different areas. But without Dodd-Frank, we'd be set it up for another repeat of bailouts.
Congressman Berman.
The story of the years before 2008 was a story of a federal government, all of us. I wasn't on the Financial Services Committee, but I'm a member of Congress. All of us being blind to what was going on that led to this enormous crisis in 2008. I want a real regulatory role for the federal government. I watched the 1980s with the savings and loan industry and what happened when things got too loose. I want mortgage companies that sell mortgages to have skin in the game when they repeddle those mortgages to others, so they're not qualifying people in order to get servicing fees, but they are also making wise decisions, checking income of applicants, constraints on how much they are going to hide huge boosts in interest rates. So Dodd-Frank to me is one of the 3 steps we needed to take in the wake of 2008 to create a more stronger economic re-regulation. If there are places where it's excessive and the places where it's throwing out the baby with the bathwater, I'm open again to changes, and we have to take a flexible approach. But the fundamental, we cannot go back to the risk-taking and recklessness of the pre-2008 period. Dodd-Frank is one important step in making sure that doesn't happen.
Okay, here's the last question, and then we'll have closing remarks. The Bush tax cuts have been an issue of contention for Congress. What are your thoughts, Congressman Berman?
Well, if we do nothing, all the Bush tax cuts of 2001 and a bunch of them from 2003 expire. That would be bad for the economy. It would be the worst time in the world to have a massive tax increase on all taxpayers. But that doesn't mean that the answer is to extend the current system completely. And one part of resolving, either in the lame duck session or by some additional extension early next year, hopefully in the lame duck session, this fiscal cliff that we are rapidly approaching is to deal with those tax cuts that in the spirit of the compromise. And for me, the spirit of that compromise is mean on the issue of tax rates for the very highest income earners, that we don't extend those tax cuts, that revenue is one part of the answer, in addition to reforms and entitlement programs, in addition to tight reins on discretionary spending. One part of the answer is to not simply automatically extend the tax cuts on the highest earners in American society. We want to maintain incentives for investment income. I love that when one of the candidates for president says, I'm going to lower tax rates and plug up deductions, and then people say, and which deductions are you going to plug up? Well, I'll work with Congress on that later. I don't want to plug up the deduction which allows homeowners to deduct their interest on their home mortgage payments, because you will be destroying home ownership when you do this and have a new collapse in real estate values.
Okay, Congressman Sherman.
Generally agree with what Howard said. I think we face both a short-term and a long-term budget problem. In the short term, we have to make sure that we don't snuff out what might be the embers of a economic recovery, but we have to be able to demonstrate to people now that we will be dealing with our national debt over this decade. We cannot go a decade with the Bush tax cuts for those with very high incomes, because we can't afford it. There are other things we can't afford as well. And hopefully after the election, we'll have a period that is a little less political, and we'll sit down and deal with not only what should be our policies in 2013, but what policies should become effective when we bring the unemployment rate down to 6 or 5%. Because we can't go to the investment community now and say we're going to have deficits for as far as the eye can see and promise us, we promise you we'll deal with it later. We do need to reform the tax code, and part of it needs to be reformed is how we tax international business transactions. When a television set is designed in Japan, manufactured in Taiwan, and sold in the United States, where are the profits earned? Cayman Islands. That's not the way to collect the fair share of taxes from multinational corporations. So we need to reform that aspect of our income tax law and many others. We need a policy that encourages and expands the economy now, but demonstrates to the capital markets that we will be able to adopt austerity, both in spending and taxes, when this economy heats up again.
Okay, that's the end of the questions. Each of you now will have 3-minute closing statement. Since I went alphabetical last time, I'll go reverse alphabetical, and Congressman Sherman, you get to start.
First, I want to recognize Fran Pavley, who just walked into the room and is doing an outstanding job for us in the State Senate. I am so proud to have her endorsement and the endorsement of every elected official who lives in the district, except for one that worked for Howard for 15 years. Every Republican elected official who lives in the district, every independent, and with one exception, every Democratic elected official. I think I've got those endorsements because of my effectiveness in Washington, but also my attention to the San Fernando Valley. I'm not just here with you today because I have a tight race. I'm standing every Sunday at the concert in the park in Warner Center. I'm speaking to every high school in the Valley. And that does not mean that I neglect my work in Washington. I have the best attendance record in California and a record of accomplishment in Washington on issues important to the San Fernando Valley. And those relate to our economy, and I focus today chiefly on making sure that the #1 source of wealth for most people in the Valley, their home, does not have a second precipitous decline. We stopped the regulations
that would have taken a third of the buyers out of the market with the same number of sellers, and that would have been a precipitous decline in home values. I'm proud to have the endorsement of over 30,000 frontline Southern California law enforcement officers, and to have a 100% voting record on from the National Organization for Women, Planned Parenthood, the Sierra Club, and the Veterans of Foreign Wars. I think that I've got a lot to contribute for the San Fernando Valley in the years to come. I look forward to working with VICA, and I have talked a little bit about maintaining home values here in the Valley. But you have a responsibility as well, at least to maintain your home, to beautify it. And the best way to do that is to take home a Brad Sherman for Congress sign. We have them out in the lobby. After this debate, there'll be another debate. I look forward to talking to each of you as an individual, getting you involved in my campaign. I haven't been able to discuss all the issues I'd like to, but visit bradsherman.com and you'll see all the various issues dealt with. You'll also see an opportunity to get involved. We've got 45 more days. I need your help. Thank you very much.
Congressman Berman. Thank you, and again, thank VICA. I want to go back to Washington, not based on what I think is a very substantially better record in the past of what I've achieved versus my opponent, but because of what I want to do in the future. I said I'm an optimist about politics. It's really a dumb job to have if you're not an optimist. And I want to go back there. I want to see through the battle to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. I want to fight to protect and ensure the security of the state of Israel. I want to help us deal with the turmoil and the instability caused, as we see around the Muslim world, in terms of how does America stand and relate and maintain its strength and its leadership. I want to reform our miserable status quo on immigration. I want to enhance our protection of intellectual property from digital theft. I want to do more. I want to do things for the West San Fernando Valley that I've been able to do for the East San Fernando Valley in terms of economic development, recreational activities, open space, and environmental protection. Each of us has our own scenario of why we're the better person. But the LA Times says Berman's the guy because he's one of the most respected members of the House. The Daily News says Berman is the guy because he's more accomplished and more moderate, and he is willing to reach out to the other side as he has done over and over again. The LA Police Protective League, the LA County Organization of Chiefs of Police, and the Republican District Attorney of LA say Howard Berman's the guy because of what he's done to help bring funds to Los Angeles for more cops on the beat. The Humane Society says Berman, Sherman, they vote the same, but we're for Berman because he knows how to get things done in Washington. He is much more effective. Put aside our own notions. You know the situation on endorsements. Brad likes to formulate things. His former staffer is one of the guys who is supporting him. My former staffer is one of the guys who's supporting me. He supported somebody, they're supporting him. But every member of Congress around this area, Republican or Democrat, is supporting me. These are the people who work with us on a day basis. A majority of the Republicans in the House. He is the ranking member on the Security and Non-Proliferation Terrorism Subcommittee. His chairman is Ed Royce, a conservative Republican. He's for me. He is a member of the Financial Services. His Democratic leader on that committee, who has worked with him for years, says Berman's a much more effective
Okay,
This is what I come to you on and say. I would like to
Thank you. I'd like to thank both candidates today. and thank you for coming to this debate. We've got another debate, do not leave. It's the state Senate seat between Senator Pavley and Lieutenant Colonel Zink. And it's about 15 minutes. We are blocking the doors so you can't leave. Thank you.
Can we get a photo of you and the other